So welcome, guys. This is Fight Fan TV Live, bringing you a Black History Month special with myself and Ben Doughty. And we have a special intro cameo from Master Aficionado Jr., who's going to take it away with the opening ceremony. So here we go. Go on.
Welcome back, guys. You know who it is. It's the neutral corner, Danny Glover.
No, the speech.
Okay. I hope that you shall live today to realize that you are masters of your own destiny, masters of your fate. If there's anything in the world that you want, it is for you. Strike out with confidence and faith in self and reach for it. If you have no confidence, you will try to defeat in the race of life. With confidence, you have won before you have started. Marcus Garvey.
Thank you very much.
Brilliant.
Good night. Yes. So that was a speech by Marcus Garvey. He's been practicing that, and that was, he didn't have no words in front of him, etc. So yeah, he's learned it very well. So yes, we're going to touch on various fighters throughout boxing, through the African diaspora as well as the African continent as well. So yeah, we're going to go through the history of boxing, talking about various black fighters. Not in any chronological order, but yeah, it's just to talk about the accolades and the contributions that they've given to the pugilistic art of the sport of boxing. And I thought there'd be, Ben Doughty is a man with a wealth of experience. So yeah, how you been, by the way?
Yeah, I'm good, Danny. Staying busy, I'm always happy to talk boxing, and especially happy to talk black boxing. To be honest with you, always have been. Always been accused of having a slight bias towards black fighters over the years, and I will own that. That's my cup of tea.
Okay, yeah, I've heard that rumor. So yeah. Well, so yeah, let's take it away. So first of all, I wanted to talk about the first black fighter of note. Was that Tom Monolox's trainer?
Yeah, Bill Richmond, his name was.
Yeah. So tell us about him. And
well, Bill Richmond is an interesting story because he was there was a nobleman called, I think he was the Earl of Northumberland. He was called Lord Percy, if memory serves, and he was in New York, in the Staten Island area of New York, during the Civil War for independence. Yeah, and he was staying with a guy, I think his name was Reverend Charlton, over there in the would have been the 1700s, the late 1700s. Okay. And he took a shine. This is going to sound a little bit suspect to our modern filter, but he took a shine to the black houseboy at this residence of Reverend Charlton's, and he said, "Can I bring him back to England with me?" Now, straight away today, you think nonce alert, right? But
yeah,
the story is that he brought him over to England with him, to the UK. He encouraged him to learn a trade to become a cabinet maker. And he also found his way into the art of, fist fighting, prize fighting. And he became the first, not just the first black prize fighter of note, but the first. People will tell you that he was the first kind of international black superstar to a degree. He did fight Tom Cribb, who in 1805 at Hailsham, Sussex. I'm trying to think what round he lost. He lost after many, many rounds. You know how those fights went in those days. They would be over. The round would end when somebody was knocked down or took a knee. And he was vanquished in about like an hour and 10 minutes by Tom Cribb. And he never, whether that was for the title, the British title as it was, or the English prize fighting championship as it was at the time, isn't clear. But he lost to the main man in Cribb. And if they say he never quite got over the defeat, and he became obsessed with finding a black protege in his own image to beat Cribb if he couldn't do,
Yeah, what they were saying is that Bill Richmond, the main reason why he lost, he wasn't big enough. He was, too small, and he was just outpowered and outsized, really. So that's what he's failed attempt. But they said he did have skills. Shout out to Base the Kid in the house, by the way. Much appreciated. Let me try and see if I can find his comment. But yeah, and then that's when he, decided to retire, and then as you said, he had quite a bit of fame. So I heard, was he a well-to-do man? He was making a bit of decent money, apparently.
Yeah, he was pretty well connected in the society of that time, and he had an academy that he would teach boxing. And Tom Molyneux, who was a former Virginia plantation slave, who is said to have won his freedom in like an early primitive prize fighter contest, a bit like the matchroom format many years later, he is said to have won his freedom by winning one of these tournaments on the plantation, and he stowed away and found his way in London, England, and then it didn't take him long to fall into the tutelage of Richmond, who started preparing him expressly to take on Tom Cribb, who was by then was acknowledged as the heavyweight champion of England, which was back then that was like being heavyweight champion of the world, because it was only really the phenomenon initially was only happening in England, you know, the championship prize fighting phenomenon.
Yeah, because what a lot of people don't actually realize, even to this day, surprisingly, is that boxing actually started in Britain. It's a British sport. What do you know? Do you remember what year that it actually started in? I know it was it the 1800s?
You know what? 1719 was the year that James Figg claimed the championship of England, and back then he wasn't just a fist fighter; he was a stick fighter and a sword fighter with a broadsword as well. But you know what? They say the first ever fight of any sort whatsoever was in 1681, the first ever prize fight, and it was between the Duke of Albemarle's butcher and his footman. They had some people said they had a beef and it needed to be settled. Other people say they didn't want to fight, and it was the Duke of Albemarle who insisted upon it. You know, and they knew which side their bread was buttered on, so they had to have this set to. But they're not even named. It just says the Duke of Albemarle's footman and his butcher were the first contestants in the very first prize fight ever. Don't get me wrong, the ancient Greeks are said to have boxed, aren't they? But there is evidence of them having gloves and stuff. But as far as prize fighting, you versus me with a money stake attached to it, that began in the late 1600s in Britain, and by 1719, James Figg was the established champion.
Okay, so what you're saying, it started off as a beef, that kind of alludes to maybe where the term having it on the cobbles might come from.
Well, yeah, I think back in the day, I think that there was old cobbled streets in that era, weren't there? So
Yeah,
no doubt it does relate to that same period.
Yeah. So then afterwards, I'd say in about 1890, John L. Sullivan was the champion. He issued like an open challenge to all comers, and then before we move to him, so yeah, about Tom Monolox's fight with Tom Cribb. So it was so he had a very good fight, and apparently he was supposed to be winning before some skullduggery took place. So yeah, if you could tell us about people more about that fight.
After a couple of tune-ups in England, and with Bill Richmond in his corner, Tom Molyneux got to challenge Tom Cribb in a very prestigious fight. What you got to bear in mind is prize fighting was still illegal, but the gentry and the upper classes were really mad for it. So you had this funny situation where it's actually illegal to have a prize fight, but the mad King George III was talking openly of his desire to see Cribb fight that Negro, the up-and-coming Negro that's just hit town. He said, that'd be great. I'd love to see that. So when you've got the King of England saying, wouldn't it be great if this illegal prize fight were to ensue, it was a losing battle. So they fought December the 10th, I believe it was, 1810, at Copthorne Common in East Grinstead in Sussex. And Molyneux was winning the fight. Yeah, he should have won. I think it was the 19th round that he rushed Cribb against the ropes and was giving him he was serving him up, when a band of a whole load of hooligans and from the crowd stormed the ring, and there was a big melee. Molyneux had 3 fingers broken, they say, on I think it was his right hand. I think some people even say he had not a broken arm, but there was an injury to his arm. So he came away from this melee a slightly depleted force, and even then, later on, several rounds later on, he hit Cribb with such a shot they say Cribb was out. But Cribb's seconds created a distraction. What they did was they accused Molyneux of having bullets in his hands to make his punches harder. He opened his hands and protested his innocence. It was clear to see his hands were not loaded. But in the couple of seconds they managed to gain themselves by having that argument however briefly, Cribb was up and back on the line and saying he was ready to fight, and the umpire said, "Let's go." And eventually, I think it was the 35th round in the end that it was raining. They were fighting in mud. It was a truly brutal spectacle according to any contemporary accounts. And by the 35th round, Molyneux was out, and he just said, "Me can't fight no more," and was carried off. But in the newspaper reports that followed it, including from Piers Egan, who wrote Boxiana, which is probably the first comprehensive boxing book ever published, he said that if there was any fair play, then Molyneux would have been the champion, and he deserved a rematch. And they got a rematch, the next year. But unfortunately, Molyneux went on the piss and went, shagging around, as it were, with his newfound celebrity status. He wasn't the same man, and he Cribb won the rematch rather easily, which they say Richmond never forgave Molyneux for his non-effort in training for the second fight.
So where did Molyneux, when he did find his newfound fame, was he in England or did he go back to the USA where he was?
He was in England. He was consorting with the London Society law. It said, it's quite funny. One of the accounts I read that I often reference on the boxing tours is it said he consorted with actresses, prostitutes, and those of lower social standing. And I was trying to think, what is of lower social standing than a prostitute? Anybody? And then I usually make a joke about a girl from a particularly, down a hill locale. But, but no, he was in England. He was in England.
Okay. I'm trying to unmute Lex. What's going on? Unmute yourself, Lex.
He could do with a bit of lighting and visibility too.
Yeah.
No, I'm in the car, sir. Yeah, sir. I'm in the car, Ben. I apologize, man.
Okay. All right. Yeah, because what it was about that, I remember, funny enough, me and Spencer Fearon was talking about Tom Molyneux, and the fact that he started going out on the drink, on the Raz, and sleeping with women. And if you're talking about at that time, that's about what year was that? 1790? What year was that?
No, that was like 1810, 1811.
So 1810, 1811, we're just coming out of, not far out, 1810. So that was still, slavery was still happening out in America and stuff, and even in a lot of the Caribbean islands. So can imagine how wild he was getting, because nowadays it's not uncommon to see a black male, sleeping or fornicating with a European woman. But back then, that would have been totally seen as unheard of. And for him, he would have had, I don't know, not to get a bit graphic, but for him, the adrenaline rush of the risk that he's taking, he would have.
You say the risk, but
thinking, oh my.
You say the risk, but from what I've read, I don't get the impression it was like Jack Johnson, who was clearly taking an incendiary position with the many, many white wives and lovers he had. From what I can gather, Molyneux and Richmond were actually quite celebrated in London society and Victorian society, and they were considered these must-have exotic novelties at parties and stuff. And do you know that thing about, let me touch your hair, for people who are not used to black people who think it's kind of quaint? I hear there was some of that vibe rather than blatant ugly racism back in that particular period in London's history. That's what I heard. That's what I've read anyway. It wasn't like a US Deep South kind of vibe from what I can gather. So I'm not sure he'd have been overly censured for having sex with white women, as crazy as that sounds.
Okay, so it's more of a fetish thing. Okay, so yeah. But then, sorry, what was you going to say, Alex?
No. He said what I was going to say. He basically went in the day of Jack Johnson, but yeah.
Yeah, it was a little later, that kind of rancor. And it was a different... I think there was not many, but there was only 5,000 black people in London, I believe, in that particular era. And I don't think, from what I can gather, black people were not seen as the same threat that they came to represent when things turned a whole lot uglier and more kind of, as has been written in history. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but then I remember there was the first black wave was in England was from the Liverpool ports, if I remember correctly. So I know that was the first city where there's first settlement of black people. So I think there was black fighters up there. But I'm not sure how well they did. But yeah, so then moving on, then we get to John L. Sullivan. He was the champion in the 1890s. He was doing his thing, bashing everyone up and doing his thing, reigning well. And then he issued an open challenge to all comers, and Peter Jackson came along in. He was born in 1861 in Christiansted, St. Croix, but this is where it gets interesting, because I can actually claim Mr. Peter Jackson because his actual parents are from Jamaica, even though he was born in St. Croix in the Caribbean, which is part of the US Virgin Islands, which I noticed that, and he's a banger. And then I noticed that another banger later on, who's from the Virgin Islands, in Julian Jackson. So it's let me know that you don't really mess with them Virgin Island guys, because you're able to whack. But and he's from the Virgin Islands. His family's originally from Montego Bay. Peter, he also had a Danish citizenship, and he also gained Australian citizenship.
That's right.
So tell us more about him.
The thing that I mostly know Peter Jackson for, other than the fact that Sullivan avoided him, because the thing with Sullivan had two kind of epitaphs. One was, "My name is John O'Sullivan and I can lick any son of a bitch in the house." And the other one was the qualifier, "I will not fight a Negro, I never have and I never will," which tends to sort of slightly take the majesty out of the first line to a degree, But Peter Jackson, because he was avoided and he couldn't get a shot against Sullivan, he went with James J. Corbett, who was obviously emerging as a challenger to John O'Sullivan, and they went 61 rounds in a really tough fight. They fought a draw over 61 rounds, which was that some people see that was the making of James J. Corbett, who shortly after that went on to defeat John O'Sullivan, in New Orleans in 1892. Corbett was lauded as one of the first scientific boxers, and his victory over Sullivan was seen as a victory of brains over brawn. But the hardest fight by far he had on the way up was with Peter Jackson, who, as you said, was a kind of multi-national veteran who had connections like so Europe and with Australia. It's a real shame we don't. You almost want to see these fights, don't you? You want to see the footage almost when you hear about these legendary 61 battles, 61 round battles, and all the rest of it. But Peter Jackson he's definitely an important marker when you're talking about. Boxing News did it recently, didn't they? They had a list of what they supposedly compiled was the most 25 most influential black boxers in history. I would say Peter Jackson would be one of them.
Yes, so he had a record of 105 fights, 57 wins, 5 losses, 15 draws, 28 no contests, 29 KOs. He won the Australian heavyweight title in 1886, knocking out Tom Lees in the 30th round. At one stage, he was a pupil of the Black Diamond, Jack Dowdridge, a Bayesian immigrant who was a pioneer in Queensland, Australia. He went to America in 1888. John O'Sullivan refused to fight Peter Jackson, as you said. He said about, he won't fight Negroes. So he fought James Corbett in 1891, which was a draw. And then Corbett got a shot. Jackson, he never got a shot, unfortunately. But he was an Australian heavyweight champion. But he's he was a man who had dual citizenship in various areas. So he was a well-traveled man, fought in many various areas and stuff like that. So shout out to Peter. Then we had in 1892 George Dixon. He fought Jack Skelly and beat him in a brutal 8 rounds. The press was angry that a black fighter beat up a white fighter. So tell us more about Mr. George Dixon.
Dixon, I mean, must have been a phenomenal fighter, and he is the first black world boxing champion of any description whatsoever. Jack Johnson tends to get most of the ink and most of the legend and legacy because he was a heavyweight and because he was such an iconic character, Johnson. But Dixon beat him to it as far as becoming, being a world champion of African descent. He was a double world champion too. He was the first, I believe he was the first man to win world titles at 2 weights as well. So his kind of accolades and his influence are enormous, really. And if you look at the footage, there's little bits of footage of his fights with like Frank Earn and the like. He doesn't look too scientific, to be honest with you. He looks, some of these black and white fighters, including Jack Johnson, by the way, look a little kind of Chaplin-esque in their movement. I know some people blame it on the limited cinematography technology at the time, but he looks like an absolute whirlwind of a fighter. Who could have knocked out a horse. Even though he was a bantamweight and a featherweight, but he was. I think he was the first Canadian world champion ever. I think he was the first. I know he was the first black world champion ever. I believe he was the first dual weight world champion. I mean, these are phenomenal accolades, aren't they? And like I say, he looks like he was all action, like Aaron Pryor on crystal meth. From what little footage I've seen.
Yeah, so I've got my notes here. So anyone who sees me looking down is because I've wrote some notes. He won the Commonwealth title from Jem Smith via DQ in the second round in Soho, London. Jem Smith was a Hall of Fame bare knuckle fighter and former England champion, English champion. So I didn't know the English title went back that far. So that's interesting.
It did, because the first British champion ever was a guy called Andrew Jepfer. Most people don't know that. In the early 1900s, he was, so.
No, this was the English. The English title, because there was like the English and then the British master. But English wasn't. Remember before it used to be like Southern area or Central area or Midlands area, depending what region you're from. Then you'd go onto the British and Commonwealth, British and Commonwealth, because Commonwealth used to be rated above British title only up to like 20 years ago. Now it's seen as the thing before the British for some reason. It's an interesting one.
It does appear to be a lesser prestigious belt. For some reason, but
even though it covers more regions, it
doesn't make sense. But
what's his name? Jem was a Hall of Fame bare knuckle fighter and former England champion. Dixon, he also won the coloured heavyweight champion. He beat George Godfrey via TKO in the 19th round on August 24th, 1888 in San Francisco, California. He fought in countries like Australia, the UK, USA, Canada, Ireland, and he was nicknamed the Black Prince. He won the bantamweight title in 1892, became the first black athlete to win a world championship in any sport, by the way.
Yeah, so there you go. So there's another accolade for him. He's got so many firsts.
Yeah.
And what
in any sport. Sorry?
What was that coloured? What did you say about that coloured championships? Or was that another word to say?
What there was in a white-dominated sport back in that era, they would sometimes have a coloured championship. So guys like Sam Lang would fight for the coloured heavyweight championship, coloured welterweight championship. Jack Johnson was the coloured heavyweight champion a long time with many defences before he won the honest to goodness world heavyweight championship in 1908. So the coloured championship was exactly that. It was a marginalised world title for the best black fighters in the world. And sometimes, as you can imagine, that guy was better than the actual so-called bona fide world champion.
Oh. Hey. Well, yes. Also, come on,
yo, everywhere.
Yo.
Can you not hear me?
She come in the other
day.
Yeah.
Right, I've got to keep this really brief. Pick up everything that you're doing on your channel, Dynamite Dan. Massive big up to my guy Ben Dougherty. He's my guy. I'd like to discuss it. I've just landed. I landed a few hours ago. I'm just having something to eat with my friend. So, but just keep up what you're doing, man. It's really a shame that to talk about black history because we do that hard on the sport. But I've got someone more than qualified in Ben Dougherty, right? Who needs to change his name from white sugar to brown sugar, right? Because Ben can hold it up really well. I like to speak about boxing history. Like sat here, I say hello, Frank Hopkins.
Hello, mate.
How's it going, mate?
Right, great man in the sport. And
I know, mate.
There's a champ there.
Big John Fury.
Yeah, and Big John Fury. So like, boom, I'm gonna go back and continue eating my stuff, and I'm going to my room. When I go to my room, because you're gonna be there in a little while, then I'll hook back up and I'll do bits with you. Yeah. Peace, you
Okay,
guys.
man.
Keep up what you're doing, man.
Oh, cool.
And Spencer, tell John Fury and them guys to lock in as well. Yeah.
Tell John Fury to what?
To tune
Lock
in.
in.
Lock in. Tune in. Yeah. So yes. Little street lingo, but old school street lingo. But yeah. So yeah, he won the
Man should be locked up, not locked in.
Yeah. Oh my god. He was also, as you said, the first Canadian-born boxing champion, nicknamed Little Chocolate. He fought in Barking. He fought in Barking Road, places like Barking Road in Canning Town.
Isn't that mind-blowing?
Yeah. Beresford Street Beresford Street in Woolwich. Like, I know exactly where that is. There's a fish and chip shop right there. Whitechapel Road, Mile End.
Yeah, because at Whitechapel Road they had a venue called Wonderland on the Whitechapel Road. That was the place where a lot of the boxing took place in the late 1800s and early 1900s, but till it was burned down in suspicious circumstances.
Oh, that's unfortunate. But yeah, he fought in countries like Denmark, USA, Wales. He had 163 fights, and he hung out with like the party boy crowd. George Dixon, he was a party boy, and he died in hospital at age 37 due to drinking.
That's a lot to cram into a life.
Yeah.
So was he like a heavy? I'm guessing what alcoholic then, kind of.
Sounds like it.
Yeah, but you know, remember back then, if you're talking about, remember the alcohol wasn't really what do you call it? You know, it's not really going through testing, so it's more moonshiny. So you could be down in something, drinking one day you could be drinking something that's 35%, another day you could be drinking something that's 80% volume. There's no regulate. It wasn't regulated because before the prohibition, because even there's like Jack Daniels, the pre-prohibition version, because I'm a bit of a drinker. There's those ones that you can find, and they're like very moonshine. It's like even with Ray and Nephew, they've only now regulated it recently. But I remember before, if you used to go to Jamaica before, you used to be able to get like the mad version, which was like near enough to 100, like the ones my granddad used to bring back. And that would take you out. Yeah, and all they do, they give you a little shot to like little kids. And then you have it, and then it knocks the kid out. You know, when the kid's crying, or just when there's a big people party, and all the kids end up sleeping in like the bedroom on all the jackets. You remember those days? But that's what they used to do. That was kind of like your alcohol back in the day. So yeah, and he was from a place called Africville in Canada. So yeah, big up to, you know,
Little Chocolate.
Little Chocolate, George Dixon, man. Yeah. More power to you, champ. And then we move on to Mr. Joe Gans, light welterweight fighter from Baltimore, Maryland. Most notably, we know fighters of today, like Tank Davis is from that area, sort of rough area. Always has been. So yeah, tell us about Mr. George Gans from Baltimore. He had like 197 fights. So yeah, man, that's a big career.
I would say classically he was a lightweight, and some people, many historians, regard him as one of the top 3 lightweights of all time. Because you get modern fans, right, and they'll say, oh, no, there's no way Roberto Duran was the greatest lightweight of all time. It's not even up for debate. No, it is up for debate. The other 2 serious candidates are Joe Gans and Benny Leonard. Joe Gans was called the Old Master. I always remember reading about his fight with... Go on. So go on. Sorry.
Who was the second one? Benny Leonard.
Yeah.
You said there was a second one. It was Joe Gans and Benny Leonard. Okay.
Yeah, and Roberto Duran. You know.
Okay.
So
yeah.
I would say that those are the 3 lightweights really up for this conversation. I mean, you know, some people might like Pernell Whitaker in that conversation, and obviously you want to talk about head to head. There's a good chance Whitaker might have been all of them, but you know, on his best night. But yeah, Joe Gans, he was the first Afro-American world boxing champion. Some people say he invented the jab. You know, Spencer Fearon, funny enough, when he was talking to Mike Tyson one time at some particular event, and he said Mike Tyson is of the view and was excited explaining how Joe Gans invented the left jab. You know, but listen, it's hard to say who invented the left jab. Some people will even run it back to Daniel Mendoza, the Jewish prize fighter who was around in like the late 1700s. You know, but in terms of glove fighting, Gans is one of those guys who had that scientific style earlier than most people had it. He was a pioneer. They called him the old master of parrying and slipping punches, as well as being accredited certainly with establishing the left jab in boxing as an effective tool. I always remember he boxed in Goldfield, Nevada. You know, when there was a big gold rush on, and they thought they'd have found gold out in California and Nevada and places like that, and there were these gold prospectors everywhere. And at the time, Tex Rickard, the iconic promoter, he was trying to think, because there were so many people looking for gold in Goldfield, Nevada, he thought it'd be good to have a prize fight as an attraction, you know, and he put on Joe Gans versus Battling Nelson. And supposedly, Joe Gans got a text from his mother on the evening of the fight, and she actually said, you know, I hope you're feeling good, son. Peter Jackson says you should win. You know, in the papers, she'd been reading it. Peter Jackson thinks you're going to win, and she said, bring home the bacon, son. And what he did when he after he won the fight, because Nelson got disqualified, I believe, in the 42nd round, he sent a telex back saying, Ma, your boy is bringing home the bacon with lots of gravy on it. But you know, Gans, he was a masterful fighter, and if you look at his films, he kind of, it still looks a little bit primitive compared to what you consider what the likes of Tank Davis will consider boxing today. But you can see the science in there. You can see some of these guys were pioneers for sure. And Gans is another big signpost in terms of the Black American boxing history.
Yes. So speaking of that, because I do remember reading that that he invented the jab. So I know that back in the day, everyone used to sort of fight like that and, you know, put your tweets upside. So who was it again? I do remember knowing this, but it's slipped my memory. Who invented the hook then?
Well, that's another great question. Who invented the hook? And nobody ever talks about that, to be honest with you. I mean, nobody. I'm trying to think. Dempsey would throw hooks, right? No question. Dempsey had a left hook and a body attack. From, you know, he won the title in 1919. Jack Johnson didn't have much of a hook. If you look at his films, Johnson threw straight punches. He caught punches. He said he picked them out of the air. And Johnson liked an uppercut. When you got close to him, Johnson liked a lot of clinching. He would lay back from punches. He would parry punches. He would throw a jab. He would throw a lot of single shots. You didn't see Johnson left hooking too much. I don't believe. Dempsey, you definitely did. But then you see some of these earlier guys, you know, like in the early 1900s, like Owen Moran, and it was almost like every shot they threw was a kind of angle shot, like a hook or an uppercut, some of them. So it'd be interesting to say who actually pioneered, let's say, the left hook. I don't know.
Yeah, we've got to find that one out for next year.
And really developed it so it looked like we believe it should look today. You know what I mean? As opposed to just a roundhouse blow. You know.
And when we do find that out, if there is footage of it, I would like to see. So that would dispel any debate, because I know you have this debate all the time with people. Was it over or was it rounded?
Palm facing. Yeah,
palm facing or palm down.
If you look at Joe Louis, who you would want to discuss at some point, I know he had a perfect hook, you know, as far as I'm concerned, and he would turn it palm facing as well. So by Joe Louis's era, which was like 1937 when he won the title, we certainly had by then everything was consummate, right? We had a jab, we had a cross, we had a hook, we had an uppercut, and Joe had every shot in the book, right? Earlier, Jack Johnson did not appear to have every shot in the book, but based on everything that I've witnessed on film.
Yeah. Thank you, Unleashed Sports. He says, big up the man them. Great show. Thank you very much. So, yes. So
yeah, sorry, and then Ben, how many rounds were they doing back then, sir? Because was I hearing you correctly? How many rounds were they?
Joe Gans went 40 odd rounds in battling Nelson. It was Nelson was disqualified in the second round. You know, sorry, the 42nd round. Nelson was disqualified in that first.
I was just checking. You said 42nd.
Yes, man. Yeah, and they, by the way, they were different in the London prize ring era. the round was of any indeterminate length. It depended when somebody went down. That was the end of the round. But by Gans and Nelson's era, there were 3-minute rounds, and they were doing that many rounds. So their stamina they required to fight open air in the hot sun sometimes must have been phenomenal.
So how did we get all the way down to 12 then? Flipping out. We're getting
well, that
robbed.
happened by degrees. It's interesting you should ask that because Joe Louis was the last heavyweight champion to box a title fight that was scheduled for 20 rounds. His second fight with Abby Simon and his rematch with Bob Pastor, they were both Abe Simon, sorry. They were both scheduled for 20 rounds. As it happened, it was academic because Joe finished both of them before 15 even. But 2 of Joe Lewis's 25 title defenses were scheduled for 20 rounds. After that, they were 15 rounders for a long time. You might be familiar with the story that when Ray Mancini stopped Duk Koo Kim in the 13th round in 1982, there was a move to cut things down to 12 rounds. The WBC were the first to implement it. The WBA and then laterally the IBF took a little longer. I think Mike Tyson versus one of Tyson's fights, which didn't go the distance. I think Mike Tyson versus Tony Tubbs may have been scheduled for 15 rounds. One of them was scheduled for 15 rounds. It didn't go that far. That was Mike Tyson. So, and eventually by 1988-89, the other 2 bodies, major Shanks bodies at the time, and the WBO had fallen in line and embraced the 12-round distance. But the last 15-round title fight, I believe, one of the last ones was Jorge Paez versus Calvin Grove in about 1988, I believe. But there was like a strawweight type title fight in the Far East, which was slightly after that. They went 15 rounds, but that's funny. I mean, listen, Jack Johnson, who we're going to talk about, he lost his title to Jess Willis in the 26th round in 1915 in Cuba, Havana. So it took a little while before they did away with that kind of kind of marathon title fights.
But yeah, and what the amazing thing is that, you know, talking about guys going 40 rounds, 20 rounds, you know, in the blazing sun, and this without no S&C, no sport, no conditioning coaches, no
peds.
You know, no peds, no sport science, and you know, all these nutritionist. These men were smoking. These men were drinking moonshine. These men were out partying, burning candles at both ends, and they were still. So I know there's only little clips of footage of their training, but man, it would be interesting to actually see what a full camp looked like, because it must be something to behold.
The only thing I would say is their pace was different, and if you look at Johnson, I mean, I remember Mike Tyson when he was kind of reviewing the history of the heavyweight championship and the heavyweight division with Harry Carpenter back in the 80s when he was still undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. And he said if Johnson was around today, he wouldn't have made a dime. That's what Mike said. He said because of the whole kind of unattractive fighting style that wasn't action packed, and there was a lot of clinching. You know, because if you're going to get through, especially Johnson was 37 when he lost to Jess Willard. If you're going to get through 26 rounds of that, you're going to have to pace yourself, aren't you?
Yeah, his style did remind me more of like a John Ruiz, Vladimir Klitschko style. He did,
yeah, exactly that. So you've got to factor in the pace. I mean, the longest fight in history was what was it? Andy Bowen versus Jack Burke, and that literally went on for over 8 hours. The fight it was in New Orleans. But you know what? In the end, they were both slung out. They were both slung out. They were both slung out because it was, and some of the crowd had fallen asleep. Some of them had left. It wasn't an epic. It just took a very long fucking time.
Yeah, I'd walk away.
Yeah,
I ain't fighting someone for 8 hours.
Nah,
that's a full shit.
And was it 3-minute rounds?
it wasn't with Jack Burke. So Jack Burke and Andy Bowen, it was, yeah. And they, like I say, they went. It was 100 odd rounds. They went. I wish I could remember the exact number, but they went. It went over 100 rounds, and it took a crazy amount of time. Like I say, I think the fight took 7 hours and so many minutes.
Yeah,
Check it out afterwards. Google it.
Yeah,
Jack Burke versus Andy Bowen, the longest fight in glove box in history.
Yeah, if someone could put in the comment section how many exact rounds in the comment section, that would be much appreciated.
Yeah, Google that. Bowen versus Jack Burke.
Yeah. So moving on to, as you said, the next guy is Mr. Jack Johnson. So at the time, James Jeffries he kept the color line.
Yeah.
And he did not want to fight Jack Johnson. Tommy Burns won the vacant title, and Jack Johnson. There's so many
Tommy
things.
Burns didn't win the vacant. By the way, Tommy Burns did not win the vacant title. Actually, it was Marvin Hart who won the vacant title against Jack Root with a 12th round KO, and James J. Jeffries was the referee of that fight. That was in 1905, late 1905. Burns beat Marvin Hart over 20 round on points in 1906. So that's how Burns became champion. He beat the guy who won the vacant title, who was Marvin Hart.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sorry, misinformation for me there. So Jack Johnson, he was a man who he's trendsetted so many things early doors, which I didn't even realize. So what he did, how he got his title shot, this reminded me of Shannon Briggs, because he followed Tommy Burns, who didn't want to give him a title shot because of the color line, followed him to England to watch him fight and called him out. And we're going back in the day, you know. And then he followed him.
He couldn't fly.
Yeah, followed him to Australia after when he had another defense, and he was calling him out. Yep. And then Tommy Burns, he finally gave him and said, "Well, F this, well, let's have it." So so then that's how Jack Johnson was the first black fighter to get official
heavyweight champion of the world. Yeah, I mean, like you say, he kept the pressure on Burns by stalking him. He obviously had a backer, Johnson, who was paying for his fare to do this globe-trotting kind of stalking act. And then he finally managed to pin Burns down. It was December the 26th, 1908 at Rushcutters Bay, Sydney. And the police stopped the fight actually in the 14th round. You know, and you know, technically speaking, when the police stopped the fight, the referee, U.D. McIntosh, gave a decision. So Johnson technically won the fight, even though the fight was stopped because Burns was in no position to continue. It officially counts as a points decision, and a points decision was rendered. A lot of people don't realise that, but
So in the fight as well, what's his name? Jack Johnson was doing a lot of taunting, saying to Tommy Burns, "Hit me in the stomach," because there was a perceived myth that black fighters couldn't take body shots for some reason.
Supposedly there was. They said you M words are all the same. You don't like it in the belly. That was a common taunt back then. Yeah, and I don't know where that came from, but yeah, the idea that the black people or fighters were supposedly vulnerable in the slats. It's true.
Yeah. So and then as you said, he was beating him up, and then the police jumped in, and they also told the cameramen turn off the camera footage before Johnson knocked him out. That way, there's no footage, because if it goes out to the
movie theaters,
world, the movie theaters, that they're going to call black people are just going to cause a riot.
The promoter was filming that fight without the fighter's permission anyway. The promoter was filming it. They couldn't reach an agreement, Burns and Johnson, over the distribution of film rights or anything. So they said, "Don't film it then, forget it," because it wasn't as important back then, as it is massively now. You wouldn't do it without a broadcasting deal, would you? But how wonderfully naive was the world when you can have an event of that magnitude, and the promoter thinks, "I'll just set up a secret camera; they'll never know. I'll just film it anyway." I mean, that's quite mind blowing and comical, isn't it? That he was filming it against their will, and the pictures we have of it today are filmed in spite of the fighter's volition.
So that basically is the first. I would say that's the first boxing illegal streaming service.
Yeah, I guess it was. Yeah, I guess it was.
So before Fire Sticks, you see, every time people think they've done something, it's nothing but a rerun. It's already been done.
Nothing new under the sun.
Yeah, and regarding with Jack Johnson, I noticed like when I see footage of him, his style and everything it's even, you see modern day like black guys dressed like him, fur coats. He had the gold teeth grills, which you see Devin Haney sporting now.
Man, he was so bling, Johnson. Yeah, he was early bling, and the fastest cars that they made back then, he wanted them.
Yeah, you see guys like Anthony Yard with the gold grill, Lawrence Coley, Devin Haney, full gold grills. So Jack Johnson was doing this back in the day before the Cash Money Hot Boys. So Jack Johnson is a real pioneer of style and profile. So yeah, man. Yeah,
and he used to wear very loud suits, didn't he?
Well, he liked the fur. He liked the fur.
Yeah, and obviously the fact that he was always with white women. he seemed to forsake black women entirely, certainly in the spotlight. That was obviously a major statement he was making in the white dominated America at the time. But one point I would like to make is Johnson wasn't necessarily this black liberation figure and this icon to his own people in that era. Certain leading black intellectuals of the day, men after your own heart, who were kind of spokesmen for the black community in that era, Danny, they didn't like Johnson, and they thought he was a massive own goal, and they thought he represented them in a light that they really wanted to distance themselves from, because they thought he was reinforcing that pimp stereotype, So Johnson was quite a divisive figure in his day. I'm sure he must have inspired many black people to say "fuck you" to the man, but he alienated a lot of black people. What they thought was more decent, hard-working, working-class, blue-collar black people who were looking to advance themselves through hard work, and they wanted to play the long game. They didn't favour the approach that Johnson obviously, because the point's been made by a lot of historians. Johnson was out for himself. He didn't give a damn about black emancipation. He didn't give a damn about opportunities for black fighters. He didn't help them. He hampered them. Joe Lewis's people wanted Johnson nowhere near a young Joe Lewis when he tried to approach them and get in on the action. They said he ruined it for all of us, and he's like the plague, So it's interesting for people to understand that about Johnson. He wasn't just some black figure of emancipation, and he wasn't carrying his people's hopes like Ali did. He was a little bit more about Jack Johnson, from what I can gather.
Yes, and how I learned about that, because I used to Jack Johnson, which obviously I still do, but one thing I was surprised about is that a man who it took so long and knew the history of what it took for black fighters to be able to get world title shots, when it came to time for him to give his fellow black brothers world title shots, he wasn't doing it. Like when Sam Langford was due a title shot, he didn't want to fight him. What Jack Johnson did, he only defended against white fighters.
He said that expressly. That's all he was going to do, Danny. You know what he said? Some people will tell you, Danny, it's because there was no money. White Americans were obsessed with the idea that a white challenger should be found, a great white hope to beat Johnson. So there was no money for two black fighters. That's not true. From what I can gather, once again, from people who know more about it than I do, have studied the contemporary source material, they say there was actually quite a lot of money in clamour for a Langford-Johnson fight. The money was there. And he said, I ain't going to fight that little smoke again, because people think that he was a little green when Johnson first beat him in, I believe it was 1906 when Johnson beat him the first time. And Johnson did beat him quite handily, according to, once again, reports. But Langford had grown since then. He'd gotten better. He'd matured a little. And Johnson didn't fancy it. He said, I will fight white guys, and I'll fight guys I think I can beat. That was what he wanted to do. He didn't really further the cause of black fighters or even necessarily black people, aside from the fact he happened to be black himself. You know what I mean? It was I don't think he saw any burden of responsibility. Certainly not.
Yeah, because he fought Sam Langford, and I know that was a points victory.
It was.
He had a hard night's work, and when it come time to give your fellow brothers a leg up and give him a shot, if you thought you was that the man, you was the man, but surely he was due a shot. And back then, I don't think the sanctioning bodies was forcing mandatories, like today. So he was able to kind of pick and choose to fight white fighters, and then he could just put it down to, oh well, look, I'm beating up white guys for you. But it wasn't about that. It was more like he the same way I feel the white fighters back then didn't really want to fight black fighters because they thought the black fighters were like stronger and could beat them. I think he felt he wanted easier nights work. So he felt, let me just fight white fighters, because if I fight some of these other black guys, there's other black guys better than me.
The other thing was, I think he wanted to be the only black world heavyweight champion. He didn't want another black man to come and win that accolade. It made it less special that he had achieved that. You probably know he did fight a black guy. He did defend his title against Jim Johnson in Paris, and they had it was a 20-round draw, I believe. I believe it went 20 rounds. And apparently he wasn't really training as hard as he should have been at this point. And he said to Jim Johnson, "Listen, you know the score." He said, "Let's just move around. Let's just be nice. It's, don't be a hero." He said, "Don't get my rag out in there. Don't get my rag out, and you'll be cool." and they went the distance.
Okay, so yeah, I've been in a few sparring sessions like that where you tell a man, like, listen, I'm gonna move you around. Don't get carried away. Yeah,
Yeah.
don't get carried away now. I'm gonna
Yeah,
move
don't
you
get
around.
mad. So I mean, Johnson, let's say it was very important to him politically being heavyweight champion. He was exiled at that point, by the way. At the point when he fought Jim Johnson, he was exiled from the United States because they were looking for him based on something called the Mann Act, right?
Yeah,
So he was a fugitive from justice, as it was called. And the one tool he had, and the thing that he could monetize, was the fact he was the heavyweight champion of the world, and he was on a tour, a European tour, and he was fighting where he could and picking up a few dollars. And like I say, he wasn't. He said that's what people see. Ali, whatever people think of him, there's a black figure who carried the hopes of millions on his shoulders. Johnson doesn't fit into that category, despite him being kind of he's probably an inspirational figure to anybody who just wants to buck the system and buck the trends. The idea of just this fierce independence and don't let anybody tell you what to do. I guess Johnson embodies that, but he's not really. I wouldn't say he really qualifies as a black racial icon.
no. He's just created black history in feats,
Yeah.
but he's not a black hero. He was not about you wouldn't catch him. And funny enough, we're going to talk about someone else who tends to get flack for not really speaking up, but Jack Johnson never spoke up, but he never gets punished for it, because if you notice Joe Lewis, everyone talks about, oh, he never spoke up for black people. He was just quiet, and he just
Lewis played the game, and they were very, because bear in mind, Johnson, right, lost the title, the heavyweight championship in 1915 to Jess Willard, yeah? And then they didn't have another black world heavyweight champion until Lewis won the title against Jimmy Braddock in Chicago in 1937, okay? So it was literally 22 years that elapsed before another black man got a shot at that championship. Now, they knew they had to play it a certain way, and he had a very, very savvy PR conscious brain trust in John Roxburgh, Julian Black, Joe Lewis's team. They were very, very careful and guarded about how they brought him along. And they said, you can never celebrate over a white man. You see, when Joe Lewis has won fights and the referee's holding his hand up, he's just got one arm up. He's not even lifting the other one of his own accord, because he was told to be humble, never be photographed with a white woman, do not gloat over a white opponent, or any opponent for that matter, But so he was very humble. He played the game. But you know what? Joe Lewis won a lot of important victories quietly behind the scenes when he and Sugar Ray Robinson refused to do exhibitions at segregated camps, during World War II. So Lewis achieved a lot for his people, but he didn't do it by looking horns at Uncle Sam. He did it to the point where he charmed America, so everybody loved him, to the point where he said in the early days it was only the black people rooting for him and it was the white people rooting against him. Then he said he got to some point, he can't remember which fight or which point it happened, when everybody was cheering for him. And he suddenly thought something's changed. All of America is cheering for me now, and everybody quotes the Jimmy Cannon, the old great sports writer Jimmy Cannon, although I didn't have a lot of time for him because he didn't like Muhammad Ali and he was vitriolic against him in the 60s. But Jimmy Cannon said in an article about Joe Lewis, he's a credit to his race. Then he said, the human race. That has been so Joe Lewis was a hugely, I think he did an awful lot for race relations. I think he furthered black people an awful lot. But if you wanted him to have that swagger kind of Black Panther chic, it wasn't him. It just wasn't him.
no,
And it wasn't the way he was brought up in the industry.
No, and he didn't seem like much of a talker anyway. And funny enough, Joe Lewis, he was born in Alabama, wasn't he?
It was, yeah, Lafayette, Alabama.
Yeah, so when you're talking about, the brown bomber, the bronze bomber, both massive punchers. So them Alabama guys, another area where, you got to watch out, because if you get clipped by one of them, even recently in Alabama, you saw that mad fight where the guys hit the guy with a chair on the riverside. I was like, yeah, man, those guys get busy.
I heard about that.
Yeah, those guys get busy. The Alabama Timers.
In his book, I think the first lines of his autobiography is red clay. I thought the whole damn world consisted of red clay, because that's what he said he could see in Alabama. There's just a lot of red clay everywhere. But but he, they moved to Detroit, right, when he was younger. His father went mad and ended up in an asylum. Munn Barrow, his name was. He was a cotton picker, and his stepfather and his mother moved the family out to Detroit, where, you know, obviously the same place that Sugar Ray Robinson came out of, you know, even though, I mean, Robinson was born in Georgia as well, but they both learned their boxing in Detroit, you know.
Yeah, yeah. And Joe Louis, it's noted that they said that, you know, he only defended against 2 black fighters in his reign, but he was seen as an American hero. Blacks in the 1930s, even though he did not talk politics, he had to play his lane, and he did so, and he did it well, and he gave black liberation by, you know, being a champion,
integration.
Yeah, integration, and being a champion and stuff.
I think Martin Luther King would have liked him, whereas I guess Malcolm X, particularly in the early part of Malcolm X's career, it was more of a Cassius Clay vibe, right? You know, Muhammad Ali. That was. I think he would have approved of that approach. You know, in the way he said, "We do not rule out violence by any means necessary," and, you know, the brashness of a young Cassius Clay and the anger and the divisiveness of the 1960s and the protests and all the rest of it. Whereas Joe Louis, he probably would have suited Martin Luther King's kind of philosophy and way of doing things perhaps more. You know, the idea you do it quietly from within, and you do it a little bit at a time, and you keep progressing slowly with small victories, you know.
Yeah, yeah. So also to touch on Sam Langford, the Boston Tar Baby, he was born in Nova Scotia, 1886. He had 314 fights, 210 wins, 43 losses, 53 draws. Tell us about him, because he people say that his style reminded them of quite a few people.
Yeah, I mean, he's got to be the greatest fighter on resume that never won a world title, right? He did box for a world title against, I believe he fought Barbados Joe Walcott for the title and lost the decision. But Langford, there are people who will tell you, Danny, that he's the greatest fighter ever. You know, the way the historians, most of the establishment, old and new, say Sugar Ray Robinson was the greatest fighter of all time, right? More establishment figures say that than anybody else, yeah? But what I've noticed is the 2 main rivals for that tag amongst the historians, the people who are really steeped in their kind of historical research, Harry Greb and Sam Langford. You know, that seems to be the Mount Rushmore, is Greb, Langford, Robinson. We need 4 for Mount Rushmore, right? I'm trying to think of who the other person would be, because I do remember putting in those terms about Rushmore before. But Langford, honestly, there are people. Springs Toledo, who wrote a great book about Harry Greb, and is kind of like a rated historian and author. He said that he used to believe that Robinson was the greatest fighter ever. He said, I used to be that guy, but he'd done so much research about Langford, and he said Langford is the greatest fighter who ever lived, you know. And I remember reading an article as a kid. I was only like about 14, and the headline in Boxing News, it said Ali was the greatest, ? What about Sam? And I remember thinking, what the hell are they talking about here? What a provocative clickbait kind of headline, you know. But he had just a serious resume. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you've looked at his footage. The footage, he doesn't look great in the footage. The reason I mentioned footage, right? Johnson doesn't look great in footage at all. Langford, there's a lot less footage of Langford, but he doesn't look great. Gene Tunney, for instance, looks really good. That's my yardstick for the one. Benny Leonard looks really good, so that's one of my yardsticks for the first fighters in moving pictures. So you could look at it and appreciate it, and see it as being of the kind of standard of boxing that we would rate today. You know what I mean? But
George
Langford,
Dixon looked good when I saw. I saw George Dixon's a bit of him. He looks all right.
Yeah, you know who else looks good, since we're supposed to be talking black fighters predominantly? You know who else looks really good? Panama Al Brown, the bantamweight from the early 1900s, who was called. There's a good biography of him by Joey Corpus called Black Ink. But he was. Mike Tyson said, "I thought Panama Al Brown was the greatest fighter I'd ever seen when I saw footage of him." You know, so he was another one.
Okay, and because they said about Sam Langford, they said considered the heavyweight James Toney with Mike Tyson power. That's interesting.
Yeah, I thought defensively he was very clever, and he could really bang. You know, he could knock you out. He could sleep you in one shot. Langford. I think we feel cheated not being able to see these guys as they really were. I think if you really are obsessed with boxing, it becomes something maddening. I think I feel the same way about Harry Greb, and all the superlatives used to describe him. But don't you wish there was some way of time traveling so we could go watch Langford and see what he was about? Somebody here says Sam Langford went blind. How did that happen, Ben? It was boxing-related injuries. He eventually went blind. I mean, when you've had like 300 odd fights, there was no health and safety. There wasn't a good medical kind of protocols then, in terms of having to do medicals and having to have eye tests before your license was renewed, all the rest of it. So, I mean, he ended up blind and broke. That is the thing. This is what people like Floyd Mayweather say, don't they? When they say, "You say I should have fought this guy, should have fought that guy." He goes, I mean, Ray Robertson, the consensus greatest fighter who ever lived, ended up, broke, living in a one-room apartment in Riverside Drive in Harlem. Floyd, he represents what Gene Tunney said, that a successful prize fighter should have two aims in mind: to avoid harm and to make money. That is what Floyd says when he says, you look at these guys with this resume and legacy that I can never match statistically, but how did they wind up?
Yeah, and with Sam Langford, I remember seeing footage of him. They did an interview with him when he was like back in, he was somewhere, and he was like in a chair, and he was blind, and they were saying, "Do you feel like bitter?" And he was like, "No, I had a great career, I had a great life." He goes, "I remember, I see the pretty girls walk by, and like he said, like I have no qualms. It's because to him." He knew what he signed up for, and to him, he had a great life, and he had a great career, and he had fond memories. So even though he's blind, he could still, his mind was still working.
I think if you read that full interview, it's an amazing document. And like I said, I think that's fantastic. When he says, like, shouldn't nobody feel sorry for Sam? I don't feel sorry for Sam. And if you've enjoyed your life, and he must have had an amazing life, and he obviously. No doubt he liked fighting because he was so good at it, and some guys really do love to fight. There are guys who profess they got no love for it, and they just. Sugar Ray Robinson said he never enjoyed boxing, but then he did it for a fucking long time for somebody who didn't enjoy it, didn't he? But Sam Langford, no doubt, and he it's just a shame we can't see what he was really like. I mean, he fought in London, he fought at the National Sporting Club, which is now like a Burberry shop, in King Street in London, in Covent Garden. But he fought in that building with the National Sporting Club when it was a members-only club, in the early 1900s. He knocked out William Ironman Hague, knocked him spark out in 4 rounds, and must have been incredible to have witnessed that. And I guess maybe 30 years ago, we could have still found someone alive who actually saw that.
Yeah. And then, so moving on, also I'd like to talk about a guy who doesn't get mentioned really, a man named Harry Wills. The top black heavyweight during the Jack Dempsey reign. So tell us more about Mr. Harry Wills.
Yeah, Harry Wills, by all accounts, was a really good fighter, a legitimate threat to the World Heavyweight Championship and leader contenders. He had some good wins in that era over the likes of Louis Angel Firpo and such, who had the classic with Dempsey. He came very, very close to fighting Dempsey for the title. They went as far as printing the tickets. And in the end, the tickets were printed because I've seen them. Well, the first boxing book I ever read, Pictorial History of Boxing, had pictures of them. But Tex Rickard, in the end, they reneged on whatever the obligation was to do that promotion. Tex Rickard said it would sell out, but it would start a riot. He was saying because of an interracial contest, which had not happened incidentally since Johnson versus Jess Willard in 1915 in Havana, Cuba. But Harry Wills was maybe he'd have beaten Dempsey at that point when they were, because he was scheduled to fight Dempsey not too long before Gene Tunney defeated Dempsey in 1926 at the Sequential Stadium in Philadelphia. But
that's what the talk was, that he would have beat him.
Yeah, but then shortly after that, he got thrashed in by Jack Sharkey, who was a good fighter himself, the Boston Gob. And that kind of, I guess that justified those who said that he wasn't a worthy challenger or that he wouldn't have beaten Dempsey or Dempsey didn't have to fight him. The fact that Sharkey gave him such a thrashing shortly after that was something which kind of took some of the gloss off this idea that he was uncrowned champion. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So And funny, Jack Dempsey, even though he wasn't black, he was called Kid Blackie for some reason, as well as
Exactly.
but he's like my favorite, like olden day fighter. Like that guy, he got busy. From when you're talking about the like proper black and white day footage fighters, he's my favorite. Like he done bits.
Technically, he looked pretty good, didn't he? Because he had this guy. A lot of them used to stand up tall and sit on the back foot back in those days. And Dempsey was all about being on the front foot, and he would get low. His center of gravity was low, and he would come for you. You know, like I remember Mike Tyson saying, "You look at him; he looks like he hasn't eaten for about 5 days." You know, when the fight with Jess Willard, such as it was, a massacre essentially. You know, so trouble with Dempsey, you know, is he didn't fight enough once he got to the mountaintop. He won the title in 1919. He defended against Bill Brennan and Billy Misk, and then the fight of the century against Georges Carpentier, the first $1 million gate in 1921, and then he didn't fight again for another, he didn't fight for 2 years, then he didn't fight for 3 years, and that's one of the reasons why he got beaten by Tunney. Aside from Tunney having a game plan and wonderful skills, was that Dempsey just hadn't been active. What he used to do at that point was he would hang around with Douglas Fairbanks and the Hollywood set and all the rest of it, and he would they would start to run out of revenue. They think we better put a fight together. Then he'd fight Louis Angel Firpo, or then he'd make the fight with Gene Tunney, because they were running out of dough to live that playboy lifestyle. It's been commented here. I don't know if it's you that's commented that one, but it says Harry Wills, Sam Langford, they fought 22 times. Exactly. Imagine, and can you imagine some of the rubbish they put on pay-per-view these days and some of the stuff that they put off in the public? These are probably, in those 22 times, they must have fought at least 10 gems. I don't doubt it. 2 great fighters. Why wouldn't they? And we can't watch these fights. They're just statistics to us. But can you imagine what it was actually like if you were around at the time? I mean, maybe I guess if it was Facebook, we'd be saying, not these two again, wouldn't we? We'd be like saying, how many more times are they going to fight? I guess that's what we'd be saying.
Yeah, someone like me, I'd be like, oh, they're reloading the dryer. But
yeah,
but to think about it, for them to actually pull a crowd in 22 times, as you said, 10 of them must have been like fight of the year contenders type style fights, because for the promoter to want to put this on again and again, and he knows it's gonna do some decent tickets, then these fights must be decent. It must be a good fight. You're not going to put on John Ruiz versus Nikolai Valuev 22 times. You're not going to put them on 3 times.
No, and obviously fighters were much more active then. And do you know what it is? Because of global television wasn't the same kind of situation, you could probably put it on in Philadelphia, then you could put it on in San Francisco to a different audience. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's true. But the news would have traveled around from a different state, like, oh, did you hear about that fight? So when they hear that fight's coming to their town, they're like, oh yeah, I want to see that. They want to see it live, because you'd only hear it about over the transcript. So when they're saying that you've got a chance to now see it in your local area, you're going to want to clamor for the tickets. And that's Lex in the background. He's doing that. So shout out to Lex. He's on the admin. So what's it? Yeah, Harry Wills. He fought the top black fighter. Yeah, Jack Dempsey's reign as champion. The New York State Athletic Commission did not allow the contracted fight with Wills to go ahead. So Dempsey fought Gene Tunney because the New York State Athletic Commission, they didn't want it to go ahead because it was due to, I think it was something to do with the do with race or something like that.
I think they said it would incite crowd trouble and maybe a riot. I think that was
they also mentioned race or something as well. I remember reading before, but that's funny because Jack Dempsey, he wasn't black, but he was a like Native American, wasn't he? Like Cherokee.
He had Cherokee Indian in him. He had a bunch of blood, nationalities, ethnicities flowing through his veins. Jack Dempsey. Yeah, I've always thought it was quaint the way his first nickname was Kid Blackie when he was that young hungry kind of hoodlum coming up. And then obviously the more iconic nickname was the Manasseh Mauler. But Kid Blackie has always, it's always done it for me, that one.
Yeah, and he, as you said, when he become champion, he started having the slick hair, and he was a good looking guy. So with and I'm sure with the heat where he'd have a nice tan. So yeah, he was probably living the high life, and in the bars, and probably making good little business deals because he always dressed quite well in his suits and stuff.
Yeah.
So
It was Dempsey was the fabulous 20s, the jazz age, and then that was a bit of a resurgence of America after coming out of the First World War, because Dempsey, by the way, was unpopular at first, because they said he was a slacker. They said he avoided conscription in the First World War, which was why a lot of Americans even wanted Caponche to beat him, because the Frenchman was seen as a war hero, So it was interesting. Dempsey didn't get that love until after he beat Caponche, and then he became this revered figure that he was,
Yeah, as Lex said, because his StreamYard kept cutting out because he's in his car in it. So yeah, stick to the admin, mate. You're doing a good job. So yeah, 14 ton. He prepared. Oh yeah, and with Harry Wills, yeah, that was a good thing I read about him. He prepared for life after boxing, and he became a property tycoon and a well-off businessman. So he done well in life. After
which
boxing.
is that's quite a plus point for a black man of that era as well. For that, enough fighters in this, even in the modern era, end up broken. And they don't look after their finances. It's pretty inspirational that somebody from Will's era was able to do that and cut himself that kind of stability post boxing.
Yeah, because I saw a little, they put little footages up and you see him in his suit and he looks like he's rubbing shoulders with, decent businessmen and stuff. So he looked like a business guy. And that, what sort of decade was that again?
Harry Wills?
Yeah.
Well, he was supposed to fight Dempsey, I believe it was 1925. So, that was his era, the 20s and the 30s. He overlapped into the 30s as well, Harry Wills. And then by the time he retired, post-retirement, that other phase of his life would have been the 30s and the 40s and so on.
Yeah, the 1930s, 1940s for those who wanted to know. So yeah, that's a great feat for a black man in that era. So then, yes, I wanted to talk about the first Nigerian world champion. His name is Hogan Bassi. So Lex will like this. Hogan Bassi. He is from Cross. You can tell us if you know where this is exactly. He's from Cross River Creek Town, Calabar, Nigeria. He was born on the 27th of April, 1932. He died in Apapa, Nigeria, 1998 at age 65. So do you tell us about Hogan Bassi? Because I remember D Styles, he did an old fight review of Hogan Bassi versus one Mexican guy, because his granddad, D Styles Boxing, you can check out his channel. His granddad knew the Mexican guy, and he put all his money on him, and he lost the money because Hogan Bassi iced him.
Who was the Mexican fighter? Because I know
Ricardo Moreno.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
He knocked him out in the third round in LA.
And I believe did Hogan Kid Bassi fight the original Davey Moore, the one who tragically died?
Yeah. So he arrived in Liverpool, UK, in 1951, 3 days before Christmas. At 19 years old, he beat Miguel Barros the day before his birthday for the featherweight title eliminator, and then he beat Sharif Hamia, a French Algerian, for the title in Paris by a 10th round TKO for the NBA ring and lineal featherweight title, because back then it was the NBA title, which is now that the WBA nowadays.
Basically that the NBA was formed in 1920, and they eventually became the WBA in 1962.
Okay, yeah. And knocked him for the NBA ring and lineal featherweight title. He defended against Ricardo Moreno, who was considered he was like the favorite to win, and Hogan Bassi took him out in 3 rounds in LA on a rainy day. He beat Willie Pep also, Hogan Bassi. That's a good feat there.
What did he beat Willie Pep? What year?
Yeah, he beat Willie Pep.
What year?
Willie Pep. I don't have the year. Someone could put it in the comment section, but I've got it down. He beat Willie Pep, but he lost to Dave Moore.
David Moore, exactly, the original David Moore,
The original one,
who lost his life when he lost by stoppage to Altamino Sugar Ramos. He died tragically. The original David Moore. Yeah.
Wait, let me get, if someone can get up in the comment section it before me, that would be great. Otherwise, wait, hold on. Hogan, let me get the year. Hogan.
I'm trying to figure out when, because nobody beat Pep for like an incredible run of fights, like about 65 fights. Then he got a draw. Then he didn't lose again for some incredible run, like about 90 fights, and then he lost to Sandy Sadler. So I guess he must have beat Pep in that kind of period after that.
Yeah, hold on. Where is it?
You know, Willie Pep at one point was 134 1-1.
Yeah. Hold on. Where is it? Unless I've misread it. Hold on. Okay, beat Dick Turpin. I beat him twice. No, I don't have Willie Pep here. Okay, he must have not fought him then.
I didn't think he beat Willie Pep. I really didn't.
Okay.
There's a couple of fighters who beat Willie Pep at any point, and he didn't sprint him either.
Misquoted by myself. Sorry about that, guys.
No.
Hold on. So, how many losses did Willie Pep? Oh, only 11 out of bloody hell.
Yeah, it's a crazy record.
241 fights.
Yeah, exactly that. You know, Pep's
No,
record.
he did. 1958.
Okay,
he got knocked out in the 9th round.
Yeah, there you go. You got it.
Yep. 19. Yeah, it's on Willie Pep's. Yeah, in this was in Boston Garden, Boston. At 100 and this must have been a 130 pound limit because Pep weighed 129 and Bassi 128. He said Pep went down in the 9th round. The scorecards at the time was 79-77 to Pep, 77-75 to Bassi, and 77-75 to Pep. So Pep was up on two of the scorecards. Yeah. On that event, let's see what the undercard was. This was it, Saturday, 20th of September, 1958. On the undercard was Joe DiNucci versus Johnny Cunningham, Billy Ryan versus Willie Wilson, Eddie Connors versus Denny Goslow, Al King versus Ola Michael, Dick DeVola versus Jackie Leons, and Johnny Gagliardi versus Jimmy Swaringer. So so Kid Bassi did beat Willie Pep, mate. So but in 1958,
did you know that Willie Pep and Joe Frazier boxed on the same bill one time?
No.
Yeah, that was a bill.
Pep must have been well old then, though.
He was, yeah. He was really in his dotage, and Frazier was up and coming, but they overlapped on a bill. Imagine that. Yeah,
that's crazy. Wait, because let me see the age of these two when they fought. In let me see. So so Willie Pep was 36, and Hogan Kid Bassi was 26.
Yeah.
And
36 was as old as the hills in that era when you had that many fights.
Yeah, Willie Pep at that time, he was 220 and 8-1, and Hogan Kid Bassi was 65, 11 and 4. Yeah.
Good veterans there.
Look at that. That's crazy. Yeah. So man, 1958. So So shout out Kid Bassi, man, beat the great Willie Pep. And remember that's an interesting thing because nowadays we see a lot of West African fighters, Nigerian fighters, but back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, even 90s, you wouldn't really see African fighters really, because I spoke to a few, and the main thing is the parents would say they wouldn't want them fighting. They'd have to be a doctor, lawyer, engineer. you know, things of that nature. That boxing was like beneath them, and you know, you can't
And
be
sports
doing
in general.
football, boxing, comedian, you know, all that type of stuff was just prohibited in a lot of Nigerian families and West African families. So yeah. So also I want to talk about, because I don't know much about his life. That's why it'd be great if I could get him on alive. Hopefully someone like yourself or Spencer could get him to come on alive. He's the first Jamaican born world champion. Yes, we have what's his name back in the day? What's his name? Who I was claiming? Peter Jackson, but he wasn't born in Jamaica. But first Jamaican-born world champion and the greatest Jamaican fighter of all time, in my opinion, and I'm sure you'd agree, is Mr. Body Snatcher, the original Body Snatcher, Mike McCallum. So, do you know much about his life, like with like growing up and stuff like that, and his amateur career?
What I remember, I read an article about him in Boxing News when I was about 14, and I remember they said he initially kept it secret from his mother. This is not a unique story amongst boxers. You heard it with Joe Lewis too, but they said he kept it secret from his mother that he was boxing, and they said what it was, he was so defensively savvy and adept because he was obsessed with avoiding facial harm because he didn't want to have to explain it at home. So they were saying that, yeah, he was good and he picked his shots with power and was nice and relaxed, but he seemed almost obsessed with avoiding any damage. And people said, what's that all about? And then he realized he just didn't want his mum to know he was boxing. That's what I remember reading about Mike in the early days. I know he had a tragedy. He lost his, I think it was his common law wife, quite early in his career. I think it was possibly before he, either before or not long after he won the WBA like middleweight title against Sean Mannion on the undercard of Marvin Hagler versus Mustafa Hamsho too at Madison Square Garden. So he had that tragedy to deal with. He lost his woman. I think they had a child together, at least one child together too. So I know his life was marred by tragedy. But the thing with Mike is he never seemed to make headlines outside of the ring. He was just a damn good fighter. He wasn't seen as charismatic. He feels aggrieved he didn't get an opportunity with the leading light to his day, which was Hagler, Duran, Leonard, Hearns. He wanted to fight any and all of those guys. And, you know, apparently Manny Stewart told him, because he was a Kronk fighter for a certain period of time, he did a lot of sparring with Tommy Hearns. And Manny Stewart supposedly told him, listen, you can forget about fighting Tommy. Get it out of your head because it ain't going to happen. And eventually he left the Kronk because of that. Duran didn't fight him. Duran would rather fight Hearns for mega bucks. Leonard didn't fight him. You know, the thing with Sugar Ray is Sugar Ray gets accused of ducking people, but the thing is, Sugar Ray was retired for a lot of his time in the 80s. Ray was in and out in the 80s. Really, you know, he'd have a after he retired in 1982. You know, he came back in '84 for one fight. Then he didn't come back again until 1987 for that, supposedly for one night only against Marvin Hagler. So, but I know that Mike holds a grudge against Marvin Hagler, or he did. He said they met at, I think it was a Hall of Fame celebration or something similar. And Marvin Hagler said, I've always respected you, Mike. And apparently Mike said he threw it back at him. He said, Marvin, where I come from, if you respect someone, you let them eat. You know, he wasn't having it. He says, you know, sorry, but not mutual.
Yeah, because in Jamaica you got to break bread. We call it. You got to break bread.
Yeah,
but
Mike
harder.
He was just such a good fighter, wasn't he? That win over Julian Jackson is a massive win, I think, as well. The way he destroyed Jackson in 2 rounds, and I don't have to tell you about Jackson and what a monstrous puncher he was. But you know, Mike, I think Mike was as good as any, potentially as good as any fighter, maybe from his era. But he wasn't box office on the level that the leading lights of that era were. And he was this guy, you know, this 3-weight world champion who was consummate fighter. You know, like they say, he was a masterful body puncher, masterful combination puncher, defensive wizard.
Because his style, with his body punches, he's like the first sort of fighter, if you look from his era, who was throwing like jabs to the body, straight rights to the body, and like the straight punches in the pit of the stomach. He was able to get around the guard of Michael Watson, knocked out Michael Watson, beat what's his name, Michael Nunn. So yeah, he was, and even when he was an old man, like he had James Toney had a stakeout of him, and Mike McCallum, he's famous of saying, look how he struggled with me, and I was an old man. If I was a young man, I'd have done him.
Well, do you know, Iceman John Scully says that if he had to show one fight, and he only allowed to show one fight to people from another planet, or anybody who was completely ignorant of boxing, and you had one shot at telling them what boxing is in all its depth, beauty, and nuances, he said it would be McCallum Toney, the first fight that he would show him. He said, and James Toney has been quoted in the past saying, "That's where I learned to fight. That's where I really learned to box against McCallum." Because it's just so scientific, both of them.
Yeah. So so then we want to take it to Britain, as we are in the UK and from the UK. Tell us about Randolph Turpin, who was the first black British fighter to win a world title.
Well, that legacy is untouchable. From they call him a 64-day hero because he was only world champion for 64 days. But when he beat Robinson, July 7th, 1951 at Earl's Court, Robinson at the time was 128 1-2, so he'd had 131 fights and only lost one of them, and he'd been boxing a murderer's row, in a Hall of Famers who's who. Robinson at that point.
Could you tell us who was part of the murderer's row?
The murderer's row was they were, there's a book by Springs Toledo about that particular clan of fighters. That was Charlie Burley, who Archie Moore said was the greatest fighter he ever fought. And, he fought Marciano and Ali as Wes Remy was another one. Herbert Hardwick, they called him the Cocoa Kid, was another one. Who else? There was Wes Remy, Charlie Burley, Lloyd Marshall, Holman Williams. All great fighters, great black fighters who never got a shot. People said that Robinson ducked Burley. I don't actually believe that he did. But Burley, Burley beat Archie Moore. Ezra Charles beat him though. Ezra Charles beat Burley. I think beat Burley 3 times. I believe he certainly beat him twice. Charlie Burley seems to be the favourite son of that murderer's row. He's the one who's been. If Ray Robinson is the consensus choice for the greatest fighter of all time, Charlie Burley's probably the indie choice. That kid who's got to have the record that nobody else knows about. The most obscure record in the shop back in the day. That's Charlie Burley. And they'll tell you that Eddie Futch and Archie Moore said he was the greatest fighter ever. There's only a little bit of footage you can watch of him against Oakland Billy Smith, but he does look really good. He does his distance timing look exceptional. But that was the Black Murderer's row. But like I say, Burley, Holman Williams, Lloyd Marshall, and Herbert Hardwick, those kind of guys.
Yeah. So So with Randolph Turpin.
So listen, when he beat Robinson in 1951. Robinson was having his 5th fight that month. I'm not taking the gloss off the victory because those were different days and fighters were more active. Turpin, he actually beat Bruce Woodcock, the heavyweight fighter, which is a pretty amazing result for a guy who's a middleweight, But no, Robinson was on a European tour. He boxed a few guys, in Germany and France. When he got to the Savoy Hotel in London, where he was going to base himself for the last week or 2 of training before fighting Turpin, the Savoy Hotel asked him to leave because they said they found the media circus that came with him unbecoming, and they said, "I'm sorry, Mr. Robinson, but this is really not us." Perhaps there was some element of racism involved as well, but they asked him to go. So in the end, this is crazy, but his manager George Gainsford said he got the money back from the Savoy, I guess, the expense money. And he said, "Don't worry, Robinson, I got this. I'll find it somewhere." And I get the impression he wanted to keep a lot of the change. And he found them this place in I think it's in Winchester. It doesn't make sense. It does not make sense. He found him a place called the Star and Garter in fucking Winchester. And it was this crazy place. Robinson had one, like a crap mattress, a bare light bulb, and every night downstairs they were having a lock-in, like this noisy shindig and like knees up. and he couldn't sleep because the people downstairs were on it, having a lock-in. And for a week, he said he couldn't sleep in that place properly. He didn't get one good night's sleep the whole time he was there at the Star and Garter in Winchester. So by the time he saw Turpin at the weigh-in on the day of the fight in London, he said he was struck with Turpin's physique and how powerful he looked. And he said to himself, man, if he can box even a little bit, I'm in trouble. And so it proved, Turpin could box even a little bit. And he historically beat Robinson over 15 rounds that night. Some people will say, yeah, if Hunnigan versus Curry was the greatest British win abroad for a lot of people, then the greatest British win on British soil was Turpin and Robinson, But then, he... I don't think he could handle the pressure and the media attention that he got from that Turpin. He wasn't at ease with it. And when he was contracted to give Robinson a rematch at the Polo Grounds in New York, 64 days later, he was winning again. He was certain Robinson was in trouble. He had a bad cut eye, and I think the referee had given Robinson one more round. And Robinson, being the great fighter he was, he made it happen in the 10th round. And he stopped Turpin. And then Turpin went on a downward spiral after that. And eventually, several years later, took his own life. Shot himself, and it's a sad story.
Yeah, and his daughter was involved in the shooting as well, and
she got some kind of gunshot wound as well.
So that was unfortunate. But yeah, he was from Leamington Spa.
Yeah,
and I think his dad was from Guyana, from what I remember. It was either Guyana. I think it was Guyana he was from. Small town Leamington Spa, so newfound fame. That'd be a lot for him to take on. But his brother also created history, Dick Turpin. He was the first black British champion when he beat Jack Milburn in 1939.
He was, unless you subscribe to the idea that Andrew Jeptha did it first. Andrew Jeptha has a claim to being a British champion in the 1900s, before the 1910s. But that claim needs weighing up because the British boxing was not going into existence at that point. But Jeptha has an argument. You can Google him. People at home can Google him.
I've got that information as well. But the thing about it is because they were saying he was South African, so it's like, was it? But technically, he was. He won it. Jeptha. He won it. The welterweight title in March 25th, 1907, when he knocked out Curly Watson in the 4th round.
Exactly. So that's a good caveat to the. I uphold anybody who says it's Dick Turpin. I say fair enough. But if you really want to be smart at boxing parties, and you bust out Andrew Jeptha, and then you have the debate,
Yeah, at a pub quiz, you're going to get a good bonus point on that one. Yeah. So also, got any more? We've got Ezra Charles. He's Caribbean roots from Barbados. We've got Joe Walcott, the first black welterweight champion, when he beat James Ferns via 5th round. Yeah, 5th round TKO. And Rube Ferns got DQ'd versus Kid Dixie for no real reason. The match got disregarded the match got disregarded, that DQ, when they found out that the ref had put money on Dixie to win versus Joe Walcott. And Walcott was a stablemate of George Dixon.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that was the original Joe Walcott, not Jersey Joe Walcott. This was the Barbados Joe Walcott.
That's who Jersey Joe Walcott named himself after. That was his hero, his fighting hero. And that because he was from Camden, New Jersey, he called himself Jersey Joe Walcott as opposed to the Barbados Joe Walcott.
Yeah, so that was the original Joe Walcott for those who didn't know. And he was the first black welterweight champion and he was from Barbados. So most notable other Bayesian fighters who you might know of today, there's the likes of Nigel Benn, which would then cross over into Conor Benn. You have Tyler Denny. Some good fighters from Barbados. Another person from Britain who he doesn't get much for what he's achieved as a free world champion. So you know who I'm talking about in Duke
Yeah.
McKenzie. He doesn't really get a lot of shine or anyone talk about, you know, the what he's achieved and the guys he beat on his during his career. So yeah, if you'd like to tell the fight fans more about him, because I think
Duke was an amazing. I mean, Duke was a really good fighter. But when people talk about ultimate greatness, I think we've got to separate world titles, even in his era, never mind this day and age, from absolute. You know, there are greater fighters than Duke who never won one world title. Let's be clear on that. There are, whether people care to admit it or not. But Duke, you know, he's definitely a damn solid fighter with a great body of work. I mean, his first world title win against Rolando Bohol. I always remember that emotional interview with Harry Carpenter afterwards, where he broke down in tears and said, "I thought he was going to knock me out," and there was Harry Carpenter saying, "He wasn't going to knock you out, old son." I mean, that was a really touching moment. But he has a great win against Gabby Canizales, right?
yeah,
Because Duke won flyweight, super flyweight, and bantamweight, right? I believe he beat Jesse Benavidez, right? He beat Rolando Bohol. Jesse Benavidez, who was a good Kronk fighter, one of the rare Kronk fighters who was of the kind of Hispanic descent, and Gabby Canizales, right? Those are three solid world class wins. He didn't necessarily have the longevity, let's say, as a world champion, but he won. So it's funny because at least one of those wins was at the Elephant and Castle Leisure Centre. You talk about not getting the platform you deserve, not getting the plaudits you deserve, and the audience you deserve. I think you can see that evidence right there from the fact that it was that a world title fight of any description should take place at the Elephant and Castle Leisure Centre. You know, but no, Duke was a damn good fighter, and a lot of people. Peter Buckley, who fought 300 times. And he fought Prince Nassim Hamed, and he fought Asiliano Freitas, and he fought a whole who's who, you know, of what boxing, not even just domestically but globally, between featherweight and welterweight. You know, and he said that McKenzie was the best he ever fought, and he said he was the best puncher he ever fought too. I know a guy, John Benny, who used to be on Facebook and used to chew the fat with us quite a few years ago. He said he sparred with Duke, and he was a very hurtful puncher, underrated puncher. You know, it's good to see Duke got a blue plaque over the house that the Mackenzies grew up in recently. At some point last summer, that was nice to see. But you know, see Duke again. He's not bombastic, and he's not massively charismatic, is he? And he was a smaller guy in the lighter weight, so he didn't become a crossover star. You know, certainly Frank Bruno's not fit to lace his boots, but you know how that goes.
Yeah, but and then also kind of like how the Smith brothers, you know, they're very well known as, you know, all good fighters when you're talking about Stephen Smith, Paul Smith, Callum Smith, Liam Smith. The McKenzie brothers, they was doing their thing, you know, back in the day. If you talk, all three brothers were good fighters, and then even their son, who turned from football, Leon McKenzie, he had won. I think he won the Southern area.
Yeah, I saw Leon the other night at York Hall Saturday night. I hadn't seen him for a while actually, but yeah, I mean he did good things, and obviously was a good footballer as well. I mean, he was a crossover from football, but yeah, the Mackenzies were, you know, there was. I mean, Clinton was a really good fighter who would have won a world title today, I'd imagine. You know, because it's just they have different opportunities today. They can expect different opportunities, you know, for an entry level of different opportunities.
Yeah. So just going to do a quick rundown of some honourable mentions. We're going to give Livingston, Bramble, St Kitts and Nevis. So shout out to our good friend Nick Manners. A lot of people, they didn't realise that he was actually from St Kitts and Nevis. They thought he was from somewhere else, another island.
I thought he was from St Croix.
Oh yeah, that was it. I remember you thought he was from there. But
yeah, they always said he was back in Ring Magazine, but yeah.
Yeah, I think that's where he started to reside as an adult.
Yeah,
but, yeah. Henry Armstrong, Julian Jackson from the Virgin Islands. I think he was from. Was he St Croix or St Vincent? St Vincent.
Julian Jackson.
Yeah.
I think he's from St Croix.
Yeah. Sugar Ray Robinson, Randolph Turpin, Guy and his father, Trevor Burbick, a Jamaican, Lennox Lewis, Mike Tyson, Muhammad Ali, Larry Holmes, Emil Griffin as well.
Griffith, yeah.
Yeah, so was it ever proven about Emil Griffin being the
Griffith, not Griffin. Go on, let's be
sorry,
Griffith.
Emil Griffith being the
Yeah.
first homosexual fighter? Was it ever proven?
Well,
'Cause
I
know
don't
there
think
was a
you
lot of
could. I
rumours.
don't think you could lay claim to being the first homosexual fighter, but he was gay, but he was gay in an era when that really wasn't a look. It wasn't an acceptable image. You know, it wasn't an acceptable identity. So it became a secret identity, and he lived in two worlds. I imagine he had a double life. I met Emil in his later years at Gleason's gym. He gloved me up one time before a sparring session, which was obviously quite regard it as a precious thing to have happened. But he was, he was gay, you know, and there was obviously rumours about him being gay. Famously, Benny Perret, before their third fight, called him maricon, which means faggot in Spanish.
Okay.
And it was an angry fight, you know, it was a grudge fight. And Griffith unfortunately killed him, didn't he? Ruby Goldstein had a bad night, didn't intervene when he might have done. He let Perret take a lot of unanswered shots when he was pretty much defenseless, and Perret never regained consciousness. And they think that the venom in Griffith's performance that night was fueled by the fact that his manhood and his sexuality had been questioned, you know, or he'd been insulted on that basis. So,
Yeah.
but I think he probably was, because I've never really known a gay boxer who was out and openly proud until we got that guy. Was his name Orlando Cruz? Do you remember him?
Yeah, the Puerto Rican guy.
Yeah, he was the
Yeah.
only kind of gay marketing angle boxer we've ever seen, wasn't he? He was. Before that, there's been rumours about guys forever. I mean, there was rumours about Lennox Lewis for
Yeah, I
for
know.
years.
Right. Yeah.
People continue to say that Lennox was, you know, that Lennox might be gay, and if he was, so what? But I don't believe he is. By the way, I simply don't. I think on balance, they were rumours. I don't know what foundation they have or what how it started or whatever. But
No, I
Orlando,
think it's because, I
I
think it's
always
because
thought.
go on.
Sorry, I always thought it'd be a great angle for a guy before you got Orlando Cruz. I thought if a guy came out in the 21st century and said I'm gay and tried to actually kind of, you know, get the pink pound on board, I thought that would have been a good marketing angle. But see, the trouble with Orlando Cruz is he wasn't good enough. If you got a potential superstar who had the skills, who was openly proudly gay, I think that would be a big thing, a big, you know, cultural phenomenon. But we haven't had it yet, have we?
No, but I've always thought that as well. There'd be an overnight celebrity millionaire. The endorsements, the gates would be instant sellouts. You have a whole new demographic of fans turning up to the fights. So bring a whole new set of eyes to the sport of boxing.
Because female fighters being lesbians really isn't the one, because it's too common, unfortunately.
Yeah, and also,
unfortunately, I don't mean I have. There's no issue with that. What I mean is, it's neither here nor there, is it? It's something which plenty of female fighters are heterosexual, but plenty of them are also lesbians.
yes, so that it doesn't surprise anybody.
No, exactly. It's neither here nor there as a marketing angle. It really isn't.
Yeah, no, it's not. Yeah, you can't really market that one. Shout out to all those fighters. Was there anyone you wanted to speak about?
I don't think there was. What I think was rather incredible. We did. Obviously, we've been on for a while now, but what was rather incredible is we did a kind of Black History via a boxing lens show, and Muhammad Ali was suddenly reeled off on the list for the honourable mentions. I thought that was kind of, we spoke about all these guys, and you're like, oh, Muhammad Ali, this guy, that guy, but maybe, you know what, the Ali thing has been done to death.
That's why.
We did speak about it a little earlier. It has been done to death. Do you know what, Danny? When I see another movie come out and there's a movie premiere, even this Zaire thing, you know, recreating Zaire, part of me thinks I love Ali more than life, but you know, I feel like I already know everything about him nearly, and it's one of them things that it is more interesting sometimes to discuss fighters that we don't get a chance to talk about, like Harry Wills or whatever, you know.
Yeah, it was to give like mentions to the guys who don't really, because I'm about exclusivity. I'm about talking about stuff which people don't necessarily know. And I know that you're boxing. I know I call myself the master aficionado, but you are a boxing aficionado and connoisseur. So I thought it's only right because everyone knows the Ali story now. It's just like if I wanted to talk about black activists or freedom fighters, you know, to go over the Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, you know, everyone's seen their million documentaries on these guys. There's never been a film about Marcus Garvey. Hence, I had my son do a speech on Marcus Garvey, but there's never been a film about Marcus Garvey, never been a film about Nanny of the Maroons, never been a film about Sam Sharp. So, you know, it's good to give mentions to historical fighters who've actually who are in boxing history and created boxing history, but they never get no shine. They never get a mention. People don't even know who they are. And what I don't want is for their legacies to just fade off into smithereens and nobody ever mentions them when they've done some great big feats in the sport of boxing. Yes, that's what I'm saying. Honorable message to Muhammad Ali. We all know the great things he's done. He's iconic. He is the Hulk Hogan, the Michael Jordan of boxing, Michael Jackson of boxing. But we all know his story. If I was to say to you, yeah, tell us about him, you reeling off what he's done, everyone's probably heard it already. So I thought it's good to talk about guys who people wouldn't necessarily have heard of before, and it's informative to me as well, you know. So yeah, and so yeah, we definitely have to meet up at some point, and have more talk so I can actually grasp, because even though also you need to do some more with the when the weather gets a bit better, start the boxing tours again, because that's where I learned a wealth of knowledge going around London. I went on 2 tours with you, and both of them were actually different. There's so much.
Always different.
Yeah, so you can learn a lot about these, and you do like the quizzes on the train when we're commuting. So those types of things you learn a lot. So yeah, I advise you guys to subscribe to Ben Doughty, follow him on Facebook, and also subscribe to his boxing channel, Sugar Silk and
Stretch.
Stretch.
Yeah, got Gary now.
Yeah, because this guy, he is a true knowledge of boxing, and you can learn a whole heap. So yeah, man. So that's why I called upon you. I called upon Spencer and a couple others. They for whatever reason they couldn't make it, but I knew you could hold the fort and do this all on your own anyway. So yeah, man, thank you very much. It's much appreciated. And also, I think that in the future we'll do. There was a topic I remember you brought up on Facebook about naming the greatest fighter from every country in the world, and I'm talking about Australia, Russia, Greece. And so we'd have to sit down and chop it up on maybe your channel or back here, and go through, and we can have the people debate and throw in names of who's the greatest fighter from Mongolia or Ukraine or Samoa, and that'd be a good topic to find out who's the greatest fighter from each country, and that'd be an interesting topic to actually go through. So
how's that fun? Let's do it.
Yeah, so let everybody know where they can find you, Ben.
Yeah, so Ben Doughty on Facebook. There might be other Ben Doughties, but you'll see the one that's got boxing related profile picture, cover photo. I believe right now it's a picture of myself and Michael Olajide with the eye patch. Real Ben Doughty on Instagram. Ben Doughty or Ben. What am I on Twitter? I believe I'm Ben J Doughty on Twitter. I believe.
Yes.
You can find books on Amazon. Just type in Ben Doughty books. Main thing we're pushing right now is the YouTube channel Sugar, Silk and Stretch. That's a unique boxing podcast featuring myself, Michael Olajide, and former world title challenger, stroke, glamour boy, model, actor Gary Stretch,
who famously fought Chris Eubank Sr.
Did indeed, yeah. Michael fought Tommy Hearns, and Gary fought Chris Eubank. So I'm a little bit outgunned in terms of experience with those two, but we make it work.
Yeah, but you did spar some serious guys down at Ed Lee's gym.
Yeah, I've fought a few. I mean, I believe I've sparred with I think 4 world champions. I believe there's Malignaggi, Vivian Harris, Wayne Braithwaite, and Darren Barker. They weren't all world champions at the time. 2 of them were, and 2 of them weren't. But I think that's John Ryder should have been a world champion. He beat Callum.
I was going to say that.
So that would have been 5, and I sparred John a whole bunch of times when he was younger. Yeah, so yeah.
Yeah. And guys, you can subscribe here at Fight Fan TV Live. Find me on Fight Fan TV Live on Instagram. You can follow the TikTok also, so you can see the symbols down there, Instagram and TikTok at Fight Fan TV Live. And on Twitter, you can find me at Danny Savvy Right. That's DANI Savvy and Right with a W. And yes, so hope you guys enjoyed the Black History Month special. And also check out the latest Neutral Corner podcast episode with myself and Ben Doughty. As I've wrote in many places, slight apologies for the audio quality because the engineer forgot to hit the mics on, but luckily our voices are prominent, so you can still hear us. And people have said that they've enjoyed it though so far, and we've had good feedback and reception. So please make sure to check out that Neutral Corner podcast episode with Ben Doughty, where I talked to him about his life and his career and what's been going on as of recently. And also make sure to go on Amazon and buy his books. Sex, what's it? Tell us again, sorry, man.
There's Drink, Drugs, Birds and Boxing, volumes 1 and 2. There's Throwing in the Towel. There is The Fifth King, The Rise and Fall of Wilfred Benitez. And there is El Torito, The True Story of Tony Ayala Jr.
Yes, that's the one. So yes, guys, that's it. Wrapped up. It's the Black Boxing History from Fight Fan TV. It's Danny Glover. And remember, guys, persistence beats resistance. And Ben, hit us with your saying again, please.
I believe I say be lucky and keep punching.
There you go. Over and out. Bless up.
Okay.